Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Effie Rinsky. I'm a product marketing manager here at Riskified, and I'm joined by Dorsey Pori, who's our product manager in charge of ATO Prevention.
Hey guys.
And today we're going to be talking about protecting your travel business from ATO attacks. I'm going to start with some background about the life cycle of an ATO attack, and then give some actionable tips to prevent these attacks without sacrificing the shopping experience for your legitimate customers. So, who is Riskified and why are we well positioned to help in this arena? We're an end-to-end solution to online fraud that's designed to drive e-commerce revenue. We offer a full suite of products to drive approval rates and prevent fraud throughout the shopping journey. And the first line of defense is our ATO Prevention product, which we want to talk about today. Here are just a few of our clients. You can see that we help some of the fastest growing companies in the world to reduce risk, grow e-commerce revenue, and provide their customers with a better shopping experience. With billions of transactions under our belt, we have a good understanding of fraud trends across verticals and locations. And you can see that we have an especially strong foothold in travel. So we're always working to stay ahead of the latest fraud MOs. And one of those sophisticated MOs is ATO attacks. So let's get into those right now. Okay, so just to make sure we're on the same page, let's first define what an ATO attack is. So this is when a bad actor takes over a good customer's account. This is not to be confused with bad actors creating fake accounts for malicious purposes. That is another separate problem which Riskified also deals with, and we'll probably have a webinar on that in the near future. So why are ATOs such a big deal? It's because they have the potential to impact your best customers. Merchants know that it's more expensive to get a new customer than to bring in a returning one. So to foster customer loyalty and encourage returning customers, merchants let customers create accounts on their sites, which contain features like wish lists, favorite destinations, and these help streamline the checkout process. And especially when it comes to travel, when there are so many options and products are largely undifferentiated, having an account and earning loyalty points with a particular vendor is often enough to tilt the scales when they're deciding who to book with. So ATOs target this group of loyal returning customers who you've worked so hard to get. So this is sort of why ATOs are more scary than your normal CNP fraud. We're actually going to take a polling question now just to get your guys' feedback on something. Take a second to enter your answer here. Okay, I'm looking at the answers coming in here, getting sort of a mixed response. Looks like I've got sort of across the board here, including E of we don't know. I would say across industries this varies a lot. A lot of merchants have ATO rates around 5 to 10%, 10 to 25%. But generally speaking, it's really hard to measure this because you have to sort of go through your chargebacks and tag which ones were ATOs, and it's pretty cumbersome. So most of the merchants that come to us actually don't have a good handle on this. Dora, can you talk a little bit about the overall trends we're seeing in the ATO space?
Sure. So what we see is that every year losses from ATO attacks increase dramatically in e-commerce. Fraudsters are just getting better at pulling them off, and this increase in skill, together with the rise in data breaches, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, are all contributing to this increase that we see. So as Effie mentioned earlier, these attacks are about a lot more than just the financial losses. So if you're a victim of a big ATO attack, it can be a PR nightmare for you. It's terrible press, basically. It shows that you can't protect your customers, your most loyal ones. And more than that, if customers have to change passwords for online sites, or cancel the stored payment method they have there, they'll basically blame you. In fact, in a recent survey for consumers that Riskified done, we found that 55% of customers say that they're unlikely to return to a platform that which their account was active.
Right, and compounding this brand reputation problem is the fact that customers tend to not keep their grievances to themselves. Social media is full of angry customers complaining about having their accounts hacked. And here's just a few examples. You can see there's some examples from airlines here. The truth is that if you Google just about any company name and account hacked, you're going to find a long list of complaints on Reddit, on Twitter, and more. And in a cutthroat industry, especially like airlines, the main differentiator is brand. And so this is really going to set you back. Okay, so let's get into the story of how these attacks happen. The first step in the life cycle of an ATO is that bad actors need to somehow get access to a user's credentials. So this can be done at a huge scale in the form of a data breach. You've probably heard of some of these recent breaches, Marriott, Quora, Facebook, but you may not have considered that in addition to a lot of personal information, hackers are also looking for credentials to retail stores. When the Marriott was breached in 2018, 500 million credentials were compromised. The Facebook breach, information for 50 million accounts was compromised. Actually, I think there have been 2 Facebook breaches this year. But there are also these smaller scale attacks, which are sort of a form of social manipulation. We might see someone emailing someone in a company pretending to be from HR and asking for their credentials. I also want to show you this. We see a lot of phishing in the form of website spoofing, where you can actually buy a kit on the dark web for a couple $100 that lets you replicate any site with just a tiny domain name change. You can see that X in the URL there, and most people aren't going to notice that. So, you send somebody an email pretending to be from Amazon saying, please log in, change your password. They go to your spoofed site and then enter their credentials, and you have their login. Once these credentials are compromised in the hands of a fraudster, there's some work that they need to do before actually pulling off an ATO. For one thing, the compromised credentials are often not to a very interesting site. So you can imagine that if a hacker got a set of Yahoo credentials or Quora credentials, there's not much to do in there. They would prefer to have credentials to a store where they can actually buy something. And in fact, some of their favorite stores are airlines, where a lot of customers have their points stored in there and they can shop in them easily. We'll get to that in a second. What may be surprising is how often this practice works. And it works because people tend to reuse login information. In fact, in a recent survey, 81% of Americans reported using the same password for at least 2 sites. I'll admit that I do it, and this is something that I work in. So, of course, if you have millions of credentials from one of these data breaches and you're trying to see if they work at a retail store, it's basically impossible to do this all by hand. So fraudsters use bots, which test these things over and over at very high speed automatically. And we actually have sort of an example from one of our merchants here of what credential stuffing looks like. Dor, can you walk us through what we're seeing here?
Sure. So what you see here is actually a login attempt data that we collected from one of our merchants a while ago when he just started looking into this problem and established the industry need. And you can see here that on a normal, this merchant has about 7,000 failed attempts to log in because of the account not exist in the system. That's the non-existent account reason. So that's actually something like if a user has multiple emails and they don't remember which one they used, or they have a typo on the email, something like that. Then on one day you see this number increase by 37,000 attempts. So this was actually the credential stuffing that Effie was mentioning. It's bots basically checking to see if the user's emails and credentials from another website works also for this one. So out of those 37,000 attempts, we saw that the bot attack was able to hack 200 accounts. So for the fraudsters, 200 out of 37,000 is a 0.55% success rate, which may sound small, but bear in mind that these attacks can get much bigger. We saw another attack, for example, that ran a list of over 2.5 million credentials in 2 days, and at the same success rate, it would translate to 14,000 hacked accounts.
Okay. Next, I just want to remind everybody that there is a place for you to enter questions. We're going to have an FAQ at the end of this, so you can write down your questions as you think of them, and we'll answer them then. Okay, so after the credential stuffing, the fraudster has a set of credentials that they know work. Now they have two choices. They can either commit the ATO themselves, or they can monetize these credentials by selling them on the dark web. We often see the latter case. You usually have fraudster A, who's good at data breaches and credential stuffing, and then you have fraudster B, who's the ATO expert, who buys the verified credentials on the dark web. So the market for verified credentials is shockingly big and efficient. Here are some samples of listings for verified credentials. We also saw things like PayPal accounts, and the prices for these are according to how much, let's say in the case of PayPal, how much the balance of the account is. Okay, so let's say fraudster B buys these credentials on the dark web. Now what? So there's a lot of forms that ATO attacks can take, but for the travel industry in 2019, these were the three most common. And I'm going to talk about each of them right now. Okay, so this is the scenario where mismatched ATO. You have a login to John Smith's account. You get in there, and there's no credit card or points saved. You want to shop for something, so you need a credit card. Now, the odds of finding John Smith's credit cards somewhere on the dark web it's pretty unlikely. There's, I think last I saw, something like 20 million credit cards for sale on the dark web. So all the fraudster does, they buy a card that belongs to somebody else entirely, and they log into John's account and they shop. Now, this sounds like it should raise red flags because you have two different names, and the fraudster has to add this new payment method before checkout, but it actually turns out to be pretty effective because it takes advantage of a merchant's hesitancy to bother what appears to be a good customer. More often than not, they see the good credentials and the good customer purchase history, and they just approve. But if fraudsters have a little more time on their hands, they can actually make these mismatched ATOs even actually quite sophisticated and difficult to spot, especially in the travel industry. So we actually have an example here of an order that we saw. Dor, can you explain what happened in this ATO?
Sure. So this is an example for an order we saw a while ago. As you said, and at the travel industry, it was a booking for a hotel in Barcelona for 5 nights, starting like 2 days, I think, after the transaction was made. The person logged in as, let's say, Kevin Durant with an email. It was an old customer that Riskified knew for the past 5 years. The order actually used the real email and account, obviously, but the scheme was like that. So the hacker that hacked this account used a random stolen card, but tried hard to mask it by using the same billing country, meaning the card came from the same country that the billing information on Kevin's account had. So that allowed the hacker to keep the same billing information, basically including Kevin's name. In addition, they put an additional spot for an additional person that wasn't related to Kevin, and we assume it was some kind of a fake travel agent selling this booking for a legitimate customer, and actually using a stolen credit card to make the transaction.
Interesting. Yeah, this fake travel agent thing is a whole interesting situation. Maybe we can get to that a little bit later. Okay, so there's the mismatched ATO, but fraudsters' lives can be a little bit easier. When customers have shopping credit in the account, it's a lot easier to commit an ATO. So in this case, for one thing, you don't even get to see that someone has changed their payment method, which is always a tip that something might be fishy. So being a victim of loyalty fraud is pretty rough. So first you have to reimburse those miles or points, but it's also embarrassing because this program that you created to foster loyalty ends up having the opposite effect of leaving customers feeling uncomfortable with your brand. So one possibility is for them to get into an account and shop with loyalty points, but the risk of loyalty fraud is compounded by the fact that these miles in particular are usually transferable. So that's a really nice feature that you can share these airline miles with friends and family, but because they're transferable, a market has sprung up on the dark web for these points, particularly frequent flyer miles. So here's an example of some actual listings on the dark web. And I'll mention, because especially so many airlines have stores that you can buy things with miles with, it's almost like buying gift card credit when you buy these on the dark web. And then, of course, the best case scenario for a fraudster is that there's a stored payment method in the account. And in this case, they can log in, use the card, and shop. And so it's especially important when you have a store with stored payment methods that you have a good system in place for detecting and preventing ATO attacks, which is what we're going to get into right now. But first, let's take another polling question. Let me pull this up right here. Just a moment. Take a few seconds to answer this. Okay. Interesting. So we have most people answering only after the order returns as a chargeback, or I don't know, we don't check this. Okay, I think that's fairly typical if you don't have an ATO solution, so that's good. We're going to talk about right now what to do. So the best case is that you can detect an ATO at login. If you catch them at checkout, or let's say at point redeem, it's possible that your customer PII has already been compromised. And in any case, if the account's been hacked, then you have to go and tell your customer that they need to change their password. The thing is that if you're running detection at login, you have to be very accurate because a false decline at login is even worse possibly than at the point of checkout, because you're just locking a good customer out of their account and they don't even have a chance to try to get back in. It's also critical that you make your decision instantly. A customer might wait a bit for their order to be reviewed, but they certainly won't tolerate more than a second or two wait when they're trying to log into their account. And then what are you looking for? Mainly, you're looking for changes from past behavior. This might include data from when the customer is browsing pre-login, plus behaviors related to the actual act of logging in, which we'll touch on in just a second. And then, of course, you're looking for those credential stuffing bots, because you want to block those as well. You don't want to let them test out credentials that they've stolen from other stores and see if they work for your store. Okay, so Dor, from a technical perspective, what are some things that we're looking for at login, or actually any point along the shopping journey to try to catch an ATO?
Yeah, so here you have some more concrete examples of features that you might want to look at when you're screening for ATOs. For example, did the same location as they did last time, or are they using a different device this time, or a device that you already recognize? Also, this is interesting, but the browsing time before the login is quite important, because good customers tend to only log in once they're ready to check out, while fraudsters will usually make sure that the credentials they have work right away, so they won't waste any time. So that's one difference. And when it comes to looking for bots, you can see here some examples of the most important things you want to watch out for. For example, the pace and rhythm of typing is very important. If it's too mechanical, it can indicate a bot, obviously. Also, how quickly failed login attempts are happening, as I said earlier. And there are also things like the way the user scrolls. So humans have much more organic mouse movements, while bots tend to have a more straight and efficient mouse movements.
Okay, so bots tend to be more mechanical than humans.
Yeah, most times.
Okay, so once you've analyzed the risk of the login and any ensuing account events, I want to emphasize that again, it's best to catch the ATO login, but you're going to want to keep monitoring throughout the shopping journey. You need to have a plan for how to respond. So there will be login attempts and redeem attempts that are obviously good users. And there will also be those that are clear-cut ATO attempts, which you're going to want to block. Then there is a gray area, these edge cases. So first you need to define for yourself what constitutes a gray area. For instance, let's say you see that a user's logging in from a different location than usual using a different device, but everything else looks normal. So that could be an ATO attack, but especially because you're in the travel industry, you need to consider that this could just be the user on vacation, using their friend's computer to shop. So the question is, are you comfortable allowing that login and risking an ATO, or are you going to be a bit more careful and ask for verification? A lot of that decision about how careful to be depends on your business model. So if you're in airlines and you're therefore pretty vulnerable to loyalty fraud, it makes sense to err on the side of being a bit more careful and verifying a gray attempt. So the same if your customers store payment methods in their accounts. And only part of this is a login decision. Again, as I said, you need to decide on these thresholds for other later account events as well. So for instance, if a login attempt was already a little suspicious, you need to decide how many more possibly risky behaviors you'll allow before verifying their identity. For instance, changing the payment option, or shopping for a far higher value than usual, or for physical goods, changing the shipping address. The principle here, though, of course, is that the more aggressive you are verifying these gray attempts, the more good customers you're going to end up challenging. There's also a lot of different ways to challenge. Dora, can you talk a little bit about the options that merchants have at their disposal?
Sure. So when you talk about verification measures, you should consider any given scenario that you have. You have lots of options to choose from with different levels of invasiveness and security for each one. And again, the degree of invasiveness you're going to choose should depend on how sensitive the data you have on your website and how bad the potential fallout of an ATO attack would be if those accounts would be hacked. So for instance, take the most common methods of verification, which are emails and SMS verifications. So SMS tends to be a bit more secure because email accounts can be taken over more easily, but than cell phones. However, there are also a little more friction in verifying via SMS because they require the shopper to have the phone nearby, obviously.
Okay, and just one more consideration about verification is soft versus hard. So soft are the kind of verifications that you may be familiar with from Dropbox or Gmail, which just inform you that a login looks a little bit odd and asking you to reply if it isn't you. A hard verification is more secure. It blocks the user until they click, yes, it was me. So again, that is the possibility to actually stop the shopping journey if the customer doesn't see that verification or something. Again, this is another dimension where you have a trade-off between friction and security, but those hard verifications are a pretty severe measure to take. So this whole thing strikes a bit of a bad chord with merchants. A lot of merchants can be squeamish about reaching out to customers for identity verification. But the simple fact is that for these edge cases, it's better than getting it wrong, either by incorrectly blocking a good customer from their account or by allowing an ATO. And in fact, we see a lot that customers even take comfort in occasionally being asked to verify their identity, say if they log in from a new device, because it indicates that you're protecting it. And again, especially if you think of soft verification, where it just says, hey, we noticed something, is really not very intrusive. So our key takeaways for today. A behavioral and device change at a point of login might indicate an ATO. And again, that also holds true for later account updates during the shopping journey that you're going to want to be keeping an eye on, and you could possibly verify those as well. You need to develop a plan to deal with your edge cases, figure out what is acceptable for you in terms of how much risk to accept, and then figure out what the right verification measure is for you. And again, not to fear verification, because for starters, it's a necessary evil. It's better than getting it wrong either way, and also that most customers don't really mind, especially when it's a soft verification. I'm going to take a final polling question right now before we talk a little bit about our product. Take a moment to answer this. Okay. All right, seeing some people don't have a prevention system. There's minor room for improvement. Okay, getting across the board. So, not surprisingly, I want to talk just a little bit about our ATO prevention solution. Dor, who manages this, actually should probably talk about it. Dor, can you explain quickly what we do?
Sure. So very quickly, just like we do at the flagship chargeback guarantee solution that we have, the heart of the ATO prevention product is delivering the clear answer for the merchant. What we do is give merchants an allow, block, or verify decisions. We monitor the user's behavior, and we give those decisions both at login and any other account update event that you'd like to. And we can also tailor the verification to your needs. So that's based on how commonly to verify, what form of verification, all that, like SMS or emails, and send it for you. And also,
I'm sorry, Dor, just to clarify, so Riskified sends the verifications for the merchant?
Yes, that's exactly true. We can send the verification in behalf of the merchant to the end user.
Okay, and what kind of tech is driving this?
So,
I mean, how do we know whether it's a good ATO or not?
So yeah, like you said, the most important thing is to be accurate, I guess. So how well we can differentiate between the good users and the bad ones. And for this, we grew on our database of over 1 billion transactions across 1,500 merchants to develop highly accurate machine learning models. And they can spot even those tricky ATO MOs that we discussed earlier on the presentation.
So a lot of it is knowledge that's carrying over from all of the transactions that we reviewed for fraud at checkout.
Exactly.
Okay, and how about if I want to use the ATO solution, do I have to use it with Riskified's main solution, or can it be used alone?
So the ATO prevention solution can be a standalone product, but it has a huge benefit to use it alongside the flagship chargeback guarantee solution. So it works like this. Data from the checkout transactions help us to get to know your customers better, so we can be more accurate at login. And there's also the inverse effect. When we can monitor the shopping journey all the way from login, it enables us eventually to boost up accuracy level at checkout review.
Okay, great. I think we're going to open it up for questions now. You can type them into the box on your panel. I see we already have a couple here. Our first question is, what you said about verification being a necessary evil makes sense, but I'm still worried about verifying my customers. Roughly what % of logins does Riskified challenge? Dor, maybe you can handle this?
I want to take this. So first of all, as FP mentioned earlier, verifying your customers can make them actually feel more protected. So it's not all about bad friction. And secondly, it really depends on your population and the scope of ATO you have. But I can say that with one of our merchants, we were able to detect 80% of all ATO related transactions in the price of challenging 0.2% of customers. That translates to 1 in 500 logins approximately. Catching 95% of the ATO transaction would have cost us in verifying 1.6% of logins. So for that merchant and that use case, that was the scale. Obviously changes between industries and merchants, and yeah, so that's just for
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Don't forget to answer. You can answer those more questions in the box if you have them. Next question is, you said Riskified's solution does its analysis at login. So if you make a mistake at login, then a fraudster can just do whatever they want on my site. Okay, good question. I'll take this one, Dor.
Okay.
So no. So as I said, the best case is that you catch them at login, because then you don't have to worry about telling the customer that their account was compromised. And there's no risk of any personal information being stolen. However, with a lot of our merchants, we have a login endpoint, but then we also have an endpoint at, say, customer redeem. So where they're going to redeem those points, we'll do another review and decide again whether to allow it, verify, or block that. Also, as I mentioned, if you're changing a payment option, we can have a review there as well. And then finally, again, if you're using our checkout guarantee solution, then if this gets all the way through to checkout, it's an ATO, then we have a final review, again, that takes into account all of the information that we got from all of our ATO data points before that. And if worst case, we make a mistake and end up approving this ATO order, we have guaranteed it for you. So you're not going to have to pay it. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Okay. This is a good question. So you said I should be looking for changes in behavior to analyze risk. As an online ticket agent, my customers change device and IP location frequently because they're on the go. So what should I look at to figure out risk?
Okay, I'll take that one. So it's a great question, but actually that's what's really cool about machine learning. So we constantly train new models for new industries, and by building smart features that look on the important data points, we are then able to customize them later to an industry-specific model. That allows our machine learning models to better understand your population and make the correct decisions based on your industry. And this allows us to know better the legitimate and fraudulent patterns in each platform, basically.
So you're saying for like an OTA, the normal things of a different IP might not be a risk factor at all, but something like, I don't know, like a certain kind of device might be a risk factor,
yes,
or
exactly.
Something, well, I can't even think about it. That's why I leave it to the machine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you have a question that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out. You can email us at sales@riskified.com. And we hope that this was informative. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.